I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 112 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, also known as OGGO. The committee, so nice, they named it twice. Pursuant to Standing Order 1083C and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, October 17, 2022, the committee is meeting to consider matters related to the ArriveCAN application. As always, colleagues, keep your earpieces away from the microphones as it causes feedback and potential injury to our very valued interpreters. I understand, Mr. Moore, you have an opening 5-minute statement. Go ahead, sir. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and honourable members of the committee. I would like to thank the Auditor General and the Procurement Ombudsman for their reports, which have identified some important lessons for us all. The Canada Border Services Agency has already implemented a number of actions to address their recommendations. At the onset of the pandemic, the CBSA was focused on protecting our borders while maintaining the flow of essential travellers and trade. The agency needed to adapt its operations at a time of considerable uncertainty over the health risks. The need for ArriveCAN arose quickly when it became clear that the manual, paper-based processes for tracking contact tracing and the health information of travellers did not meet the needs of the Public Health Agency of Canada. FAC asked the CBSA to assist them by developing a digital form, and the first version of ArriveCAN was released 6 weeks later. Over the following 2.5 years, the CBSA responded to the changing health requirements set out in over 80 orders in council by releasing 177 different versions of the app. The agency has estimated that the border health measures related to the ArriveCAN app cost $55 million, including a number of non-IT costs, such as $6 million for the Service Canada call centre. The Auditor General and the Procurement Ombudsman reports have identified a number of serious weaknesses in the procurement and internal controls processes. We have accepted their recommendations, and our management response plans are now already underway. I would like to highlight a few of those actions aimed at strengthening the agency's governance and assurance functions. We have strengthened the first line of defence by requiring all HQ staff with financial delegations to retake 4 procurement training courses to help them better understand their responsibilities. Given the weaknesses in procurement oversight, we have established a new Executive Procurement Review Committee to strengthen the second line of defence by reviewing all contracts and task authorisations over $40,000. We have also established a new Procurement Centre of Expertise, which is developing an ongoing programme of quality assurance reviews to ensure compliance with the directive, with a particular focus on the need for proper record keeping. Our management response plans are aligned with the plans of other government departments, as developing the ArriveCAN app was a shared responsibility. The agency leveraged PSPC's contracting authority on over 30 of those contracts and Shared Services Canada for 7 contracts. The CBSA was the contracting authority for the remaining 4 contracts. In the first year, the agency was responsible for managing the development, enhancement and operations of the ArriveCAN app on behalf of the Public Health Agency of Canada. However, no new funding was received in the 2020-2021 financial year, and the costs were coded to a general COVID-19 pandemic measures account, which would have included other pandemic-related expenditures such as personal protective equipment and enhanced cleaning. The agency did establish a dedicated financial code in the second financial year, when funding was provided by the Public Health Agency and the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. And in hindsight, this should have been created earlier. I am very proud of my employees, my colleagues and the frontline border services officers who served Canada throughout the pandemic. We acknowledge the serious deficiencies and we welcome the lessons learned. We are now focused on addressing the recommendations that have been made. We'd be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll start with Mr. Brock, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for your attendance today. My focus will largely be with you, Mr. Moore, but I invite anyone else on the panel to weigh in if you feel you can contribute in some fashion to the response. I appreciate your opening statement, Mr. Moore. We've heard that from a number of officials at CBSA, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, but I'm not interested in lessons learned. I'm interested in how we got here and the issues that are really concerning to Canadians. There seems to be a culture of hiding information, threatening those that come forward, reprisals, and a general lack of accountability from senior leadership at CBSA. This committee has bona fide concerns that CBSA's top brass is covering up and deliberately trying to hide their actions while scapegoating others. There are now over 12 investigations taking place because of this debacle. My time is limited. I'm going to be asking for straightforward and honest responses, please. Mr. Moore, we've seen the ArriveScam briefing packages that went to Ms. O'Gorman. Your name is all over these documents, as is Min Doan and Kelly Belanger. This committee has been lied to by current and former senior CBSA leadership, particularly Mr. Doan, Ms. Belanger, and former President Mr. Osowski. I expect you to tell us the truth today. Will you agree to that, sir?
Thank you for the question. I hope that everyone tells the truth and answers your questions to the best of their ability.
Thank you.
I will certainly do that.
Thank you. So the biggest question that we need to put a final point on without deliberating any further is who at CBSA was responsible for the decision to choose GC strategies, also known as Government of Canada strategies. We've had evidence from Cameron MacDonald on 2 occasions confirming that, Mr. Antonio Utano confirming that it was Min Doan. We also have what was really telling is a public document, an ATIP response from CBSA, which confirms in Annex A of the document that, and I'm going to read this out, who made the decision to contract GC? My office. This is in reference to Min Doan's office and Kelly Belanger's office. Same office. My office made the decision to pursue the contract with GC Strategies. The 2 proposals for the work were presented to the CIO and President, and the decision was made to proceed with GC Strategies as their proposal and approach aligned what the CBSA was looking for, particularly rapid staff augmentation. The Deloitte proposal was a managed service using their cloud instance. This would have involved additional risk and did not align with our decision to build cloud mob competencies with the agencies. Are you prepared right here and right now, sir, Mr. Moore, to confirm once and for all that it was Min Doan who ultimately made the decision to go with GC Strategies? Yes or no?
So I'd like to provide some additional clarification for the committee. So there were 2 decisions here. The first decision was how the ArriveCAN app would be developed. That decision was a staff augmentation decision. The decision was to keep this in-house in order to develop the app and use staff augmentation to bring in the technical services required. The other option was the managed service approach, which is the Deloitte option. It was decided at that time by the executive committee that the managed services option would not be appropriate because it was unclear what the statement of work would be from the Public Health Agency of Canada.
Sir, this is all evidence we've already heard. I don't need you to waste valuable time that I have to repeat that. I'm sure you've been following the committee and you know what the evidence has already led. Will you confirm with me right now, at this point in time, that Min Doan was charged with the responsibility of choosing Government of Canada strategies?
So I can confirm once the staff augmentation model was agreed, the ISTB branch was responsible for putting in place the resources required, whether those be resources from...
And was that Min Doan, sir, yes or no? Was that Min Doan?
He was the Vice President of the Information Science and Technology.
Was that Min Doan, sir, yes or no?
He was the Vice President, and it was a decision made by...
And the Vice President at that time was Min Doan, correct?
That is correct.
Why did you have a difficult time saying that?
Because he is the vice president. but
Right.
All
So,
the documentation has been signed.
End of
by-
discussion. You've now confirmed, as many people have confirmed, that it was Min Doan. Min Doan repeatedly lied to this committee, saying he didn't personally make that decision, his team did. So I'm very glad for your honesty, and we can clarify that and move on.
But I think he
Now,
is
this was, sir, I asked the questions. This was such a political hot potato for the government that the Minister of Public Safety at the time, Marco Mendicino, had significant concerns with Government of Canada strategies, particularly with the millions of dollars received. And we now know that they receive upwards to $19 million for their involvement in this particular boondoggle. Now, we know that Mr. McDonald, Cameron McDonald, was threatened by Min Doan on October 28, 2022. There was a phone call. He was told that the public safety minister at the time, Marco Mendicino, was unhappy with the ArriveCAN media coverage and wanted someone's head on a platter. He was worried that either he or you, sir, Jonathan Moore, were going to get fired, so he was talking about someone's head on a platter. Is that my time?
That is your time, sir.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Moore, perhaps you can get back to replying the next round. Mr. Sousa, please go ahead for 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, did we ever have a contract? Does it even exist? A company by the name of Government of Canada Strategies? Is that such a? Is there a company by that name?
There is a company by that name, and we have in the ArriveCAN, there's 4 separate contracts in the name of GC Strategies.
But what are they called? Is the name Government of Canada?
Point of order.
Or is it
Point of
called
order,
GC
Mr. Chair.
Strategies?
Sorry, I'll pause your time, Mr. Sousa. Your point of order, Mr. Brock?
Yes, Chair, Mr. Sousa is deliberately misleading the evidence. We've already got confirmation from Christian Firth that GC Strategies,
That's not a
GC
point of
stands
order,
for
Mr. Chair.
Government
I
of
know,
Canada.
I don't get to
That
Chair.
came
It's not a
right
point of-
from
Mr. Brock?
Christian Firth.
Latitude.
Yeah.
I'm just
Continue,
trying-
Mr. Sousa. You've got 5.5 minutes.
I appreciate it. I just want to get clarity if, in fact, the company is called GC Strategies or, in fact, it's called something else. And I don't believe there is a contract with any name by the name of Government of Canada Strategy. It doesn't exist.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, is that correct?
I can confirm that all of the contracts are in the name of GC Strategies.
Fair enough. Mr. Moore, can you provide us some context now? I think there's some clarity that's required in terms of the last round of questions. To whom was ArriveCAN? How did it become ArriveCAN in the first place? Who ultimately made decisions collectively to achieve what has been established to this point? Like right now, the question is who signed for GC Strategies? We're all concerned about how those contracts were arrived at and to what extent there was privilege that was possibly given to one contractor over another. Please confirm.
So I think there's a couple of questions in there, but I think what I would say is that the contracts with GC Strategies were arranged through the contracting authority, which is PSBC, and the CBSA, who is the technical authority. The contracts are signed by the Board of Technologies and Innovation Directorate, and at that time, the majority of the contracts were signed by Mr. Itano, who was the Executive Director, and the counter-signatory was Mr. McDonald, who was the Director General. What I said in my previous answers was the Vice President at that time was Mr. Min Doan. So the Information Science and Technology branch was responsible for developing the application and implementing the application within 6 weeks of the start of the pandemic.
In terms of the Auditor General's report, and you've read it, I presume, you've seen, I know you have because you've provided your concurrence with some of her recommendations. There's a dispute in terms of what amount was actually attributed to the overall program that that grew throughout the process. Can you give us some clarity in terms of those numbers?
So the CBSA supports the calculation of $55 million as the total costs of the public health measures within ArriveCAN. The OAG, in their report, actually confirm that in paragraph 1.24, that they identified the public health components as being $53 million. However, they did add a further $6.2 million for the e-declaration, the customs e-declaration, which computerized the old E311 form. And on that basis, they came up with a calculation of $59 million. We have a detailed reconciliation between the two numbers and what has been included in our numbers around the public health measures and what's been included in the OAG numbers, which include other activities, in particular the e-declaration, but also mobile border costs.
And who was making those decisions as it escalated? I mean, obviously, there are a number of contractors that got engaged in this. Who made those other decisions for these other contractors?
So in terms of the overall cost of ArriveCAN, at the start of this process, we did not know what the cost would be. And in fact, in year one, we expended about $5.6 million. And none of that was funded externally. We had to fund that within the CBSA itself. In the second year, we did receive some additional funding. We received $12.37 million from the Public Health Agency of Canada, and we are in Supplementary Estimates B, and we also received $12.4 million from the Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada in Supplementary Estimate C. Therefore, in the second year, we had a $25 million budget, which we managed to. We managed to a separate cost centre. That's when we created the new code. In the third year, we requested funding, and in Budget 2022, it was announced that the agency would receive $25 million. So over the course of the 3 years, the money was incrementally provided to the CBSA. I recognise that this should have been established as a project from the start. It wasn't, and that is very unfortunate because it meant that we did not have the normal governance structures associated with project management.
Is ArriveCAN being used still today?
ArriveCAN is still in operations. I actually used it myself a couple of weeks ago to return to Canada. And around about 300,000 people a month do use it. So about 3.6 million people use it. There are big advantages with using ArriveCAN. There are now dedicated lanes at the international airports which operate with ArriveCAN, so you can get to the front of the lanes. And also it reduces significantly the transaction time at the primary inspection kiosk.
Did CBSA have the ability to do it in-house as you stated earlier?
Well, I would say the CBSA did do this in-house. However, they used staff augmentation to assist them. I think one of the lessons learned was we were relying too much on staff augmentation. But staff augmentation is not a bad thing. You need to bring in people who are technical experts, in particular cloud experts, which we may not have in place, but also other experts, in terms of technology architecture, in terms of security, accessibility. So it's not a bad thing to bring in contractors and consultants. The issue here is whether we overuse them. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Sousa. Mrs. Vignola, please, for 6 minutes.
Merci. Thank you very much, Chair. Gentlemen, thank you for being here with us today. In her report, the AG indicated that the PSPC queried the decision of the PSPC and the CBSA with respect to the proposals that were made. Why were the recommendations from PSPC ignored? And secondly, why did the CBSA accept the recommendations of SPAC because of what was the concern? Thank you so much for your question.
Confirmed, I think, last week by the Deputy Minister of PSPC. These concerns were raised at a Director General level within the Information Science and Technology branch. It is unfortunate that they weren't raised at a wider level. I myself, as the Chief Financial Officer, did not receive any concerns. I think this is one of the key lessons learned. This is the reason why in the new procurement improvement plan, we've instigated the Executive Procurement Review Committee, which allows us to scrutinise all contracts and all task authorizations above 40,000. This will provide the second line of defence and allow us to do that.
Merci. Thank you. So that means then that the recommendations wouldn't have been applied if you had not been informed about it. Should you have been informed about it?
We should have been informed about it. I think PSPC is clear that they did inform the agency, but they informed the agency at the technical authority level. At that time, Alex's team was looking after the CBSA contract authorities, 4 contracts in total. Also, the team were very involved in the acquisition of PPE at that time.
Merci beaucoup. Lors des examens des options des...
Thank you. What proof did you have that GC strategies could really supply a good balance, a cost-effective balance to the federal government?
My understanding is GC Strategies had been working with other departments already and had shown evidence of being able to provide the technical architects required. What this contract was about was the acquisition of technical architects to do specific pieces of work, a range of different skills and range of different experience. The majority of experience required more than 10 years experience in the past. So GC Strategies were providing those. If one of those individuals was not satisfactory, then the Information Science and Technology branch would ask for an alternative.
Merci.
Thank you. Mr. Martel, you received the 2021 prize from ICGM with respect to the ArriveCAN, and I congratulate you for that. Oh, thank you. Thank you. The reason for the prize was the reduction of time that was necessary for processing people arriving. It streamlined it. And also the various control measures took less time. That was very helpful, demonstrated the abilities of the technical people. If necessary, 40 seconds reduction in wait time per person is something that is gigantic or not? Well, you'd have to speak to colleagues from operations, but certainly there are measures that would have an effect on cost. Thank you. Mr. Moore, on January the 18th, Ms. Ogerman told the committee that a better oversight had been put in place. I have 4 questions with respect to that. For how long have these measures been in place? What are the effects of these measures to date? Are they permanent measures? And my last question, these measures that are presently underway for oversight and verifications, for example, the FFC contract with Deloitte, does that indicate the success in the agency?
So we have been looking at our and developing our procurement improvement plan over the last 9 months. So our first step in that was to remind individual managers of their responsibilities for procurement. So all individual managers with delegated financial signing authority, over 800 people, were asked to do 16 hours of training. So that's the first thing, just to remind people what they needed to do. The second action was we created the Executive Procurement Review Committee. The first meeting of that was in October, and we are now looking at every TA and every contract. And the third action is we are now implementing a quality assurance review process through Alex's team.
Merci, vous aviez déjà expliqué ces étapes.
Thank you. You explained the steps, but what is the effect to date? What would you say?
The effect is we have
answer, please,
much
Mr.
more
Moore.
transparency over all of the actions we are taking on procurement, and we have strengthened first line and second line of defence. This was lacking during the COVID period.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bachrach, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as I mentioned in the sound check, I've come down with a heck of a head cold. So if I have to turn off my camera to blow my nose, I hope the folks in the room will forgive me. Mr. Moore and your fellow witnesses, thanks for being here today and answering our questions. I'll start out with one of your statements from today's testimony. You said that ArriveCAN was done in-house. And I'm wondering if you can confirm where the intellectual property now resides. Is it the property of the Government of Canada, or does it belong to the contractors that did the bulk of the work?
So I'm pretty certain in my answer to this is that the IPR belongs to the Government of Canada, because this is an app which we developed and we are continuing to operate.
Okay. If you could confirm that and provide that information to the committee after this meeting, it would be appreciated. There's been a fair bit of focus, Mr. Moore, on who signed the contracts, and I think now we have fairly straightforward answers around the role of Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano. I'm interested in the process of confirming that the work was delivered as required. So I assumedly, at the other end of the process, the contractors complete the work and they submit it, and there's some process of reviewing that work and then signing off on it before the bills are paid. This is my basic understanding of the way that the process should work. Were those same individuals responsible for signing off on the invoices prior to the contractors being paid for the work?
So and
confirming that the work was done in good order?
So I can confirm that the work was done in good order through the Financial Administration Act, Section 34 requirements. So, as I said before, the Board of Technologies and Innovation Directorate were responsible for overseeing these contracts. They would receive invoices from the contractors, and their job would be to check that the individuals had done that work and they were also of the right technical quality and experience in order to make those payments.
So these are delegated authorities assigned to individuals within that secretariat, and those individuals had the training and were responsible for signing off on the invoices to confirm that the work was done. The reason I see you nodding, so I'll take that as confirmation. The reason I'm asking this is because one of the Auditor General's findings was that CBSA approved timesheets that included no details on the work completed. And this is a quote from the AG's report, this limited the agency's ability to challenge the contractor's invoice without knowing what work was completed, its ability to allocate the invoice to the right project. So I guess what I'm trying to point out is that the AG has highlighted a lack of documentation, which assumedly would have made it difficult for those delegated authorities to confirm that the work was actually done. Were those delegated authorities, those individuals who had the authority to sign off on the invoices, were they provided with adequate information to confirm that the work was actually done?
So I think there are two issues here. I think one is around certification that the work has been done. The other one is around whether the costs have been allocated correctly to the cost centre. So, for example, a cost centre manager may well have been observing and seeing the individual on the invoice has done 30 hours. However, they may not have then allocated it specifically to ArriveCAN. This was what I said at the start of this evidence, that we did make a mistake in not setting up a separate ArriveCAN cost centre code from year one. So we were receiving an invoice, we were saying, yes, that 30 hours has been done, but we weren't coding it between ArriveCAN or between operational expenditures or elsewhere. However, we are now looking at all of these invoices, because a number of allegations have been made, to go back and to make sure that we have not been overcharged. If we do find that we have been overcharged, we will pursue repayment for those. And the Minister for the Treasury Board announced last week that PSPC had identified some overpayments, and we will be doing the same. If we identify any invoices which were not for work done, we will be pursuing payments for that.
So the Auditor General has said that there weren't adequate details to confirm that the work is done, but you're asserting that the individuals signing off that the work had been done had adequate information to confirm that that was the case. Is that correct?
I'll ask my colleague, Mr. Martel.
Certainement. Merci. Il y a des...
Yes, thank you. There are instructions that are very clear on in the contract with respect to invoicing. They have to look at the details, and if they don't understand the details with respect to that, to the person submitting the invoice can ask questions.
How many individuals at the Secretariat were involved in this process of signing off on invoices?
So I don't have the number of details of the number of individuals who are signing it, but this comes back to the point I made earlier around the delegated financial signing authorizations. So we have over 900 in the agency headquarters in total.
Mr. Moore, could you provide to the committee the names and titles of the individuals who were responsible for signing off on invoices related to the ArriveCAN contracts?
So I can certainly take that away and see what the evidence we are pursuing at the moment to look at invoices and whether they have been checked.
Okay, I'm not understanding if that's a yes, you can table with the committee the names and titles of the individuals responsible for signing off on the ArriveCAN work.
I'm hoping that we can do. I'm just saying that we'll go back and...
You're going to check first and see if that information actually exists. Is that, do I understand you correctly?
That's exactly
okay, I would certainly hope that it exists. But as we've seen throughout this inquiry, there are a lot of surprises. So I'll look forward to providing that information to the committee. And if it's not provided, we'll ask questions about why it doesn't exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. And Mr. Moore and others, just so you're aware, at this committee, we have passed a motion in the past requiring any request for response back has to be within 3 weeks, lest you get called back on why you've not provided that information. So just so you're aware, we're down to second round, 5 minutes. Mr. Brock.
Thank you, Chair. Going back, Mr. Moore, to my last question before I ran out of time. Conversation between Min Doan and Cameron McDonald in October of 2022 that Marco Mendocino was so unhappy with the media attention to ArriveCAN that he wanted someone's head on a platter and that either Min Doan would be fired or you, sir, would be fired. He made specific reference to that. Then he turned and said that, you know, Cam, if I have to, I'm going to tell the committee that it was you. So he threatened Cam McDonald. That threat was then relayed up the chain of command. Ultimately, it was communicated to Aaron O'Gorman. And to your knowledge, sir, do you know if anyone, particularly Min Doan, was suspended or reprimanded for that threat? Yes or no?
So I think I could start with the comment made by the Minister. I'm not aware of that comment. I've never come across it. In fact, I've never briefed the Minister at that time, and I was not informed.
Min Doan confirmed the conversation took place. All right, so we can move on from that. Do you know if Min Doan was reprimanded for his threat to Cameron McDonald? Yes or no?
No, I do not, but I understand that this investigation is ongoing.
Have you had any discussions with any of your ministers responsible for the portfolio during the ArriveCAN rollout? That would include Mendocino, that would include Blair, and that would include LeBlanc. Have you had any personal discussions with any of your ministers?
So personally, I have briefed the ministers in terms of the SUPS-B and SUPS-C package in 2021-2022, and also in terms of the announcement in the budget 2022 of the 25 million.
Did you update any of the ministers with respect to the overruns with the ArriveCAN app?
No, because of those briefings, it was a briefing about the supplementary estimates to prepare them for committee.
Were you aware of any other senior executive who would have had those discussions? For instance, the president, the deputy minister, or Gorman and Osowski. Would they have had those discussions with those three ministers with respect to the cost overruns?
I'm not aware, but I can't comment on for my president.
Okay. You heard reference to the award that you received for the ArriveCAN, which really begs the question, why was the award given in light of the Auditor General's report and the Procurement Ombudsman report? Can you actually provide us with documentation, sir, as to how the three individuals identified at CBSA received those awards? Were there nominations, things of that nature? Can you provide that to the committee within 3 weeks?
So again, I'm not aware of those awards, and so I'll have to come back to you on that.
Okay. We heard last week from PSPC that 3 additional companies that received taxpayer monies and should not have received those taxpayer monies are being now investigated by the RCMP. Those 3 companies were not identified by the PSPC because of privacy concerns. Are you familiar with those 3 companies in question, sir?
I am not familiar with those companies. However, I have been informed by PSPC that the CBSA is involved in this, and our involvement is limited to $15,000.
the CBSA is involved in relation to the 3 companies?
So I'm informed that the individuals who have been identified as fraudulently making claims, some of those claims relate to us. I think there are 36 different departments affected.
Right.
CBSA is affected up to $15,000.
Okay. And that was in relation to their supposed work on the ArriveCAN app?
It's not necessarily in relation to the work on ArriveCAN app.
But it could?
In relation to anything else.
But it could?
I'm not aware of the PSPC. I think you'd have to address that to
Okay.
PSPC.
To your knowledge, sir, are there any other companies that are operating under suspicious circumstances with their contracting at CBSA, either under the ArriveCAN app or other work done at the request of CBSA that are being considered for RCMP referrals?
So I'm not aware of any at the moment, but as I've said before, we are now looking through all of the interactions to see if there are any examples. So, for example, we have done a review of our contractors who are working and whether they are included in the GEDS system, and we have identified a few names there, but I'm pleased to say in all of those cases, we have spoken to the other employer.
Thank you, sir. I have in my hand a multi-page letter addressed to Ariane Reza, the assistant, as she was Assistant Deputy Minister for PSPC, in relation to the request for a national security exception in relation to one company. I'm looking at the 3rd page of this document towards the bottom end of it. And you've indicated we have identified a supplier that has already successfully implemented a modern tool for risk assessments on shipments coming into Canada. That he was once involved with Transport Canada that leveraged technology to build a modern cloud-first approach, low-touch process to replace a manual high-touch process. That company in question is GC Strategies, Government of Canada Strategies. Is that correct?
So I do not believe so, mainly because it refers to shipments. It does not refer to individuals, but perhaps I could ask Mr. Leahy to answer that.
I am afraid that is our time. Perhaps next round you can respond to that. Mr. Baines, you're up, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. My question, I will address Mr. Moore first here. As you know, sir, elected officials come and go, but in our public service, we have people who spend decades in the bureaucracy and program areas, and we learned from GC Strategies. Mr. Anthony had been working in the IT sector for companies since 2005. Mr. Firth said he had been working since 2007. And the procurement processes in place on how to obtain some of these contracts have been around since 2003. So we're talking over 20 years where these contractors, subcontractors, many of whom who interchange with different companies that are all working on various projects with government. And over time, there's relationships that have been built amongst all these people working together. And so my question to you is, do you think that the CBSA has done enough to ensure there's appropriate oversight of employees and their relationships with prospective contract bidders looking to find this work and understanding how to get it? And so I'd like to hear about what oversight is in place.
I think what I'll do is I'll cover it in 2 separate sections. So the first one really is around the conflicts of interest. So we have, as part of our procurement improvement plan, strengthened our disclosures around conflicts of interest. And what we are now doing is we're asking all of our staff to declare if they do have a second job and to allow us to evaluate that. There is no real reason why people shouldn't have a second job, but the important thing is to be transparent about that and ensure that there is no potential conflicts of interest. The other area I think you were referring to is the oversight of the procurements and task authorizations. And as I've said before, our procurement improvement plan has created the Executive Procurement Review Committee, which is going to be looking at everything over 40,000. We've already had over a dozen meetings of that, and we're already starting to really strengthen the second line of defence around this. I think the third thing I would say is you're asking a more general question around the Government of Canada's procurement, and I think the Deputy Minister for PSPC did refer to that in her evidence around over 600 staff augmentation companies, really sort of looking to see if we can insource and actually have these facilities, these people in-house. I'm pleased to say that the CBSA has already started to do this. We have set a target of bringing 25% of all contractors in-house to allow us, reducing our level of contractors by 25%. And in some cases, we've actually gone even further than that. So in terms of our Chief Data Officer, I'm pleased to say that they had 75 contractors in April 2023. They're now down to 44 contractors in April 2024. That's the aim, and that's a 41% decrease. So I think there's multiple different parts to your question.
Well, I'd like to see that there's no opportunity for collusion amongst people trying to obtain these contracts, and knowing, having a relationship with certain people and saying, yeah, here, this is what you should do, get this contract, this is how you can get this. So to your knowledge, has CBSA identified any employees who also have procurement contracts with the government?
I was referring in terms of going through all the checks. We have not identified any at the moment, but what I can't say is we're continuing that work. And, so like PSBC has identified some fraudulent payments, I think we have to continue that work and make sure it's all completed. I think it is worth saying, though, that the CBSA takes the allegations of wrongdoing very seriously. And as we have said before, we are currently, investigating those allegations.
When I asked Ben Doan about the decision to pick GC Strategies, his initial response was a team of 1,400 people were all involved, and then was narrowed down to 6 director generals. Did this decision come down to these director generals? Did they advise Mr. Doan to make this decision? He's clearly made the decision.
Just a brief answer, if you can, Mr. Moore.
I can't comment on exactly who made the decision, but I think Min Doan is accountable, just like I'm accountable for the CFO functions.
Thank you, Mr. Baines. Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to come back to some of my previous questions. When I asked you what were the effects of the measures that you have put in place, you spoke about transparency and strengthening. You spoke about a second line of defense. Do you have any criteria, both quantitative and qualitative, to measure the effects of the measures that you have put in place?
Certainly. So in terms of our second line of defense on financial controls, we do random selective testing of invoices, and at the moment we're doing about 5% of those invoices, and we're checking to make sure that they comply with all the various rules and regulations.
Merci.
Unfortunately,
Thank you. I'm so sorry, but I only have 2.5 minutes. Are they permanent measures?
Les 3 mesures que vous avez.
The 3 measures that you named.
they are permanent measure, and the testing of invoices has been going on for many years.
Merci. Je vois.
Thank you. I see that you're testing for contracts that exceed $40,000. What explains the fact that $2, $3, $5, and $6 million contracts weren't tested beforehand? What is your reaction when you're faced with that? Did you just sign it off and let's let the money fly away? It's only the taxpayers' money. Why was there no testing before October 2022 when this issue arose?
So I think the thing I would say is during the COVID, it was a very intense period of time, and we were relying on the delegations of authorities in the DFSA. We're also relying on the oversight of PSBC for their contracts.
Merci.
Thank you. In October 2022, when we started to look at the issue, we heard 54 million for ArriveCAN. So we said to ourselves, oh, that includes a cost for advertising and so on. And now we're faced with a huge amount, $6 million for calls to bid by Service Canada. Why, rather for the call centers at Service Canada, why was Service Canada call centers, why were they so involved? What does it cost now in advertising to inform people for the app, for its use?
Very brief answer, or perhaps you can get back to us in writing.
Yes, certainly. I think very briefly, the Service Canada call centres were operating for 2 years. They actually managed 645,000 calls from members of the public, from travellers.
Thank you. Mr. Bachrach, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, a question about the CBSA's involvement with Bottler, and granted this deals with a different project than ArriveCAN, but I think it raises some of the same concerns around the diligence of the agency to confirm that the work was actually completed. So in 2021, the company Dalian submitted invoices for work done by Bottler, and specifically those invoices included billing for time allegedly spent on the project by Ritika Dutt, one of the principals of Bottler. At the time, Ms. Dutt was on medical leave, and this was known to CBSA's Border Technologies and Innovation Directorate, and yet they went ahead and paid the invoice to Dalian anyway. Why was that done, given that they knew that Ms. Dutt couldn't possibly have done the work since she was on leave?
So in February 2021, CBSA contracted with Carvadix in a joint venture with Dalian. It was for 6 particular outputs. And so what the CBSA did was they paid for 2 of those outputs because that work had been done. They did not pay for the other 4 outputs because that work was not done to a satisfactory level. It was not about individuals. We were not paying on an hourly basis. We were paying on an output basis.
But the invoices that were paid specified work done by Ms. Dutt, correct?
Specified work which had been done. They did not specify who did it within the Bottler organization.
So, okay, on the invoices, there was no indication of who was being billed for the work?
Well, it was on a task-based system, so we were paying for the tasks which had been completed.
Okay, but for these task authorizations, there are timesheets, correct?
The timesheets are not relevant when you're doing tasks, because what you're doing is you're saying, we will pay you this amount of money for delivering this output. We're not saying we will pay you X dollars per hour.
So at the completion of that work, there's documentation submitted to indicate that the work was completed and who did the work, correct?
Well, no, there's a document. So
Okay.
They were writing particular documents. We received those documents and we decided whether the documents had satisfied the requirements of the task authorization. So one of the documents, for example, could have been a plan. If a plan was satisfactory, we did not have any input into who wrote the plan.
Did Ms. Dutt okay?
Unless it's a very quick question.
Well, did Ms. Dutt contact CBSA and advise you not to pay the invoices because it was for work that was not completed?
So my understanding is Ms. Dutt did contact the CBSA, but that was inappropriate because we should not be working with subcontractors. That's not our role.
Thank you very much. Mr. Berthold, welcome back to OGGO.
Merci, Président. Monsieur Moore.
Mr. Moore, I want to come back to an answer that you gave my colleague with respect to this letter about the national security, as she says, that there were certain rigorous processes that could be exempted. Were you aware of the fact that this was a request?
We're talking about the national security exemption and about the reference to an alternative supplier.
Yeah.
Mike, would you?
So you signed it? I have your signature.
Yeah, no. It was sent by me to PSPC.
Bah, écoutez,
Yeah.
Jonathan Moore.
No, it's me. Yes.
So vous avez signé.
You signed. I don't understand why you hesitate. Was this letter at the very origin of the fiasco that cost $80 million for the agency? If this exemption had not been requested, would we be in the position that we're in today?
So the national security exemption was requested by PSPC for them to access the powers at the start of the COVID pandemic. The national security
Mais
exemption...
c'est vous, Monsieur Moore, vous avez beau parler.
Yes, but you can talk about PSPC, but it's your signature and your letter. You asked Ms. Marianne Reza, Deputy ADM of PSPC, to provide that exemption. And in the letter, you said that we have found a supplier that has the modern technology to offer. I mean, I'm not going to go on quoting it, but you did not seem to know who the supplier was.
I think the supplier was about a commercial, it was not about ArriveCAN. But Mr. Leahy, who's in the commercial trademark...
Monsieur Moore.
Mr. Moore, you signed it. You are the signatory of the letter. You are saying to the Deputy Minister, the ADM, that there is a modern tool that will be effective, but yet today you can't tell us who that supplier was?
Well, it was an example, but we did not use it.
C'est un exemple.
It's an example, but it's like the examples on the GC strategies site, Mr. Moore, or where Mr. Firth and Mr. Anthony quoted many officials from the federal government without being able to give us names. And you're doing exactly the same thing. You're citing that you found a supplier. Well, who was the supplier? And why would that serve as an example to justify an exemption from the rigorous procedures of supply of PSPC with respect to an issue that should have cost $80 million but now is in the hundreds of millions? So it's very difficult for me to understand who's responsible. Here, it's your signature.
I think if you allow Mr. Leahy to speak, he will give you the details.
Only if you have a name. Seulement s'il y a un nom.
Only if you have a name.
As context, the national security exemption
Je
applies.
veux pas de contexte,
Okay.
juste le nom.
I don't want the context, I want the name. Where it's marked XREF Transport. On the last page, we found a supplier that's already put into operation a modern tool, XREF Transport, right beside it. Transport XREF is a system for... It's XR company. Well, thank you so much for telling me that it's not complicated. Then I find it very surprising, though, Mr. Moore, that you weren't able to tell us who the supplier was. Mr. Moore, is there someone in the entire GC strategy process who would, at any moment, raised a red flag to you to say something might be wrong?
Au fur et à mesure des...
During the 176 updates?
No. There was no one was raised a red flag about GC strategies until the committee started its investigation.
Vous êtes le dirigeant...
You are the director of finance for this area. Is that correct? And therefore, are you the one that signs contracts and checks to suppliers?
So I was not personally responsible for ArriveCAN. However, as an executive of the CBSA, I do have accountability.
Who is the executive?
I was the CFO at that time.
Yeah.
And I was an executive of the CBSA, and so I take responsibility for the failures which have been identified, and I am also responsible for the improvement plan which we are developing to ensure this does not happen again.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, please, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, sir, for your testimony. I wanted to ask you a bit about the improvement plan. You've read the AG report. You've read the Procurement Ombudsman report, talking about the deficiencies in management and documentation. And I wanted to ask you, as some of the steps that you've taken, CBSA has said that they have struck an executive procurement review committee and also a procurement center of expertise. Can you please explain the executive procurement review committee? Who sits on it? What is its role?
So we established the Executive Procurement Review Committee, and our first meeting was in October. I chaired the first 8 of those meetings, and now the Executive Vice President has taken over the chair. A number of VPs sit on that, but also Alex's procurement team are on there. And the role is to challenge the individuals who are bringing forward tasks, authorization or contracts, who are the technical authorities, but also to seek assurance from Alex's team that we are complying with all the rules and regulations and the standard operating procedures. It is a second line of defense. It's a check to make sure that the issues which were identified in the Auditor General and the Procurement Ombudsman report do not happen again.
So the question I have for you, there are literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of decisions that are made, contracts that are entered into, or tens of thousands, I should say, contracts entered into. How do you decide what to look at? There's just a flood of contracts. How do you decide what you review?
So at the moment, we have set it at all contracts above $10,000, all contracts and task authorizations above $40,000. This will be evolving over time. We're already seeing a reasonable number coming in, and it's not unmanageable, and we will hold meetings whenever we need to get through the volume. Over time, as we start to see stronger first lines of defense, we might be able to raise those limits.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of, you talked about in this committee, you've testified that there's a process of financial reconciliation that's taking place between the numbers that the AG has put forward and the CBSA's original numbers. When can we expect that timeline to be completed for that process, and can we have the results of that reconciliation review?
Already been completed, and I'm very happy to provide those results to you. But as I explained earlier, the OAG does identify that they have 2 numbers in play. They have a $53 million number around the pandemic health component, and then the $59 million number includes the customs e-declaration.
Okay, if you can get that for us in writing, that would be terrific. And sir, question as well. Going back to, you were asked originally, the very first question of the committee was asked by my Conservative colleague. He asked the question, and he didn't provide you with an opportunity to respond. But can you tell us, in your words, who made the decision to hire GC Strategies? Can you just provide us, and be as precise as you possibly can, who was part of that decision-making matrix?
So it was decided by the Information Science and Technology branch. It was within that branch. It was the directorate. It was the Board of Technologies and Innovation Directorate. The executive director at that time was Mr. Utano, and the Director General was Mr. MacDonald, and the Vice President was Min Duan. So it was within the delegated authorities of the Information Science and Technology branch who made that decision.
Help me to understand, because my colleague was saying that it was Min Doan's decision and singling Min Doan out, but you're saying that Mr. Utano and Minister MacDonald were also part of that decision. Help me understand that.
So the signature on the documents shows Mr. Utano as the technical authority with the second technical authority, can't quite get the terminology right, is Mr. MacDonald. They both reported at that time to Mr. Min Duan.
Okay. Is it is it shared authority? Is that fair to say, or can we say that ultimately the authority is Mr. Doan's?
Well, I think it's shared responsibility, but as I've said before, as the Vice President of a branch, Min Duan is accountable.
How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
15 seconds.
Sir, what would you have done differently, looking back?
I think I'd had more oversight. I think that's one of the key issues for us. We were incredibly busy, though, and also we were understaffed in a number of different areas. I think it's worth just reminding everybody of what the pandemic was like at the start of this. Immediately, most of our people were sent home. We had to set up home offices. We had to set up new organizational structures, and we had to manage the border. And a lot of the individual border services officers really were very reluctant to touch paper because the Public Health Agency had said you can catch COVID from touching paper. So the necessity to get paperless processes in place was really important.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Seaback, welcome to OGGO. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I see that today we actually have some gentlemen at the committee that I'd like to ask some questions about KARM. I see Mr. Leahy there and Mr. Martel, the Director of Procurement. The challenge that I have with KARM is the complete lack of inconsistent statements on when this project began and how much it will cost. To quote Macbeth, it seems like there's something rotten in Denmark. Mr. Gallivan testified at the Trade Committee. This was started in 2010, and it was a $370 million project. In the Gazette Part 2 that just came out on March 13th, 2024, this government states that in 2014, CBSA began the design and implementation of the KARM project, and the KARM project is a $526 million
point of order,
contract.
Mr. Seaback, I'll stop the clock. Mr. Point of order.
Thank you.
Mr.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I think
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I don't mean to interrupt my my honourable colleague's train of thought, but I just wanted to know the relevance here. This is the ArriveCAN study, and we are looking into ArriveCAN and not KARM. And so I just kindly would ask my colleague to establish the relevance to the study on ArriveCAN. Thank you.
I actually see the relevance, so I'll allow to continue. I think we heard from witnesses that Deloitte, which is running KARM, was messing up KARM and therefore was in the penalty box, which led to us getting GC strategies. So I do appreciate your point, but I do see the link. Go ahead. You've got 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. That just I do apologize, but that is such a tenuous thread, if I could even call it that. And again, we're here on a constituency week. May I remind the chair to study ArriveCAN, and I'd prefer us to focus on ArriveCAN. And again, what is the link to KARM? I don't see it, Mr. Chair. I don't see it.
Well, the link is the contracting irregularities that took place in KARM, and therefore Deloitte was allegedly put in the penalty box, which is how we end up with GC strategies. So the link is pretty direct, and exploring how we got to GC strategies through the problems with KARM might illuminate the committee with respect to this study.
I'm fine with that. Go ahead, Mr. Seaback. You have 4 minutes and 4 seconds.
Thanks very much. So was this actually a project that started in 2010, as Mr. Gallivan stated, or in 2014, which you published in the Gazette a mere 2 weeks ago?
So maybe if I can just deal with the penalty box. So I'm not aware of anyone saying that Deloitte were in the penalty box. And it is worth, identifying that Deloitte worked on us for a number of other things as well. So myself in the Finance and Corporate Management branch,
we'll be happy to provide that from the ATIPs to the committee, and we'll bring you back to talk about it. But if you could answer my question, which is this a project that started in 2010 or 2014? Because your government is saying two absolutely contradictory things.
I'll ask Mr. Leahy to answer this.
Yeah, so the March 2010 is the first phase of KARM, so that is in the critical path material that was provided at in our trade committee. You'll see that.
So that's AR. Is that ARL?
That is ARL, yes.
Wait, so that's the subsequent program to KARM.
It is the precursor to, like a revenue ledger is extended into KARM, but the language in the submission you'll see is both KARM, ARL. It's interchangeable.
Okay, so what I can't understand is the cost. So what we heard from Mr. Gallivan is $370 million. But what we've also heard at committee was that you've spent $438 million. These two things are very inconsistent. But what actually concerns me the most is this. In a transition document prepared for the VP of CBSA on July 31st, 2021, it says the costs are $371.5 million. But interestingly enough, that nothing in the estimates or anything else adds up to that at that time point. And in fact, you sign a contract on October 6, 2021 for $322,125,778. Now, is this contract a result of verbal approvals that were given to Deloitte to do work, and you had to then prepare a new contract with Deloitte?
So maybe I can ask Mr. Lay to respond to the detail, but I think what I will say at the start is the KARM project has been a long-running project. The first two elements of KARM have been delivered. So the agency revenue ledger has been put online.
I know, but that's not answering my question. My question was the cost identified in the transition document to the VP, July 31st, 2021 is $371 million. Nothing in the estimates or supplemental entries adds up to that, but there is a contract on August 6, 2021 for $322,125,778. It appears to me that this is creating a contract to deal with the overruns, because there was a contract for Deloitte in 2018 for $32 million, which now appears to be turned into a $322 million contract a mere 3 years later. Is this the result of verbal authorizations that had to be covered with a new contract?
So again, I'll say we did not come prepared to this committee to answer questions on KARM. We're very happy to bring back the detailed information, unless Mr. Leahy can answer now.
I can say definitively it wasn't based on a verbal contract, if that was the question. So
verbal approvals for work that lead to the necessity of a new contract.
That is not the case. So I think the evidence that we're bringing forward from our trade committee will demonstrate the history and bring clarity, hopefully, to the question you raised about the lineage of this of the contract. So that material is coming forward to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Lay. Thank you, Mr. Seaback. Mr. Sousa, please, for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mr. Seaback, when was, just following up very quickly on KARM, when was it first developed?
I think this meant for you, Mr. Lay.
For me? Yes. So the initial funding allocations came in March 2010.
And when was Deloitte awarded the first contract for the project?
There were two small contracts around that activity, and then the major contract was in February 2018. But the initial two contracts to begin work on KARM ARL, I don't have the precise dates in front of me, but they were awarded around the March 2010 timeline.
So was the majority of the project funding allocated before October 2015?
There were two allocations of funding. So there was an initial allocation, as I mentioned, around that timeline, and then there was a contract award in February of 2018.
Out of curiosity, how much expected loss of revenue would exist as a result of KARM's delay? Like I know you have an estimate why KARM exists, and they're expected to capture some funding. Any idea?
A rough estimate would be about $3 million a month.
Okay. Mr. Moore, post-pandemic now, new normal, changes are being made. Do you still see poor record keeping happening on any other projects at this point? Recognizing some of the issues that have arisen from both the Ombudsman and the Auditor General?
So I think knowledge management and record keeping is always going to be an issue. I think it's an issue around the world in terms of how you ensure that you have the right records, especially post-COVID, which I think impacted as particularly. So we are definitely putting in place ways in which we can improve our record keeping, and I think the good example of that is the Procurement Review Committee is going to be completely minuted, and all the records will be kept centrally by the governance unit.
A lot of suggestions about interrelationships between prospective contract bidders and relationships with employees. Do you think CABSA has done enough to ensure that appropriate oversight is being taken in this respect?
Important to say that if a contractor has worked on developing an RFP, then they are precluded from bidding for that RFP. That is part of our rules and our regulations. So if we find that the investigation says that there's evidence behind that, then action will be taken on that. That is not acceptable. The only time you can use a contractor to help you develop an RFP is if it's a technical requirement, and then the individual who helped you or the company who helped you have to preclude them from bidding on that contract.
Have you been approached by RCMP?
I have not been approached by the RCMP.
You're aware of the reviews, obviously, being done internally in respect to these issues?
I'm aware of the reviews being done internally, and the Security and Professional Standards Directorate do report to the CFO. However, for reviews of executives, all of the reporting is done directly to the Deputy Minister, the President, and I am not being party to any information on those investigations.
Have you ever felt pressured by elected officials in respect to these files?
No, I have not experienced any pressure from elected officials, and actually, as the CBSA, our minister is the Minister of Public Safety, and I very rarely see the minister unless it is about supplementary estimates or main estimates.
And the code of conduct amongst you and your team is very, very clear?
So the CBSA has a very clear code of conduct, which is always kept under review and will be updated. But also we have the overarching public safety ethics responsibilities as well.
How many contracts a year does the CBSA undertake?
So maybe I can ask Alex Martel to answer this.
About 1,500. About 1,500 a year. Yeah.
A year. And in respect to this, the issue around the ArriveCAN component, there is some discrepancy still about the costs. And you mentioned two different costs, one in regards to the immigration component of it, one in regards to the support for the pandemic. Can you elaborate a bit further on this?
So there are two elements to ArriveCAN. So if you look at, well, certainly on my mobile phone, I still have the ArriveCAN app. I've used it a couple of weeks ago to return to Canada. One of the things the Auditor General did point out was the benefits that ArriveCAN is now ongoing. It's still ongoing. The work we have developed during the public health testing stage is now available for us to use for the advanced declaration.
Thank you, Mr.
So the discrepancy in the cost?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's our time. Unless you have a very quick question that you can respond in writing to, Mr. Sousa?
No, it's okay. Thank you,
okay,
Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Moore, the measures, those three measures that you put in place, are they being applied for existing current contracts? For example, the management of resources for the CBSA.
Okay. They are being applied to all contracts. The only exception is KARM, which is being managed by the Executive Committee directly. There's a subcommittee for KARM.
Donc, GCRA.
So KARM is not being, managed.
But by a separate committee.
Faire connaître l'application, ajouter.
Add other important characteristics for the app, make people aware of the app. That's what Madame La Douceur said with respect to a question put to her by a journalist, rather. So you have to better understand the app to be able to better use it. So it's about 300,000 people monthly who use it, but that's 13% of the totality of travelers, which is quite a lot between you and me. So how are you going to get it better known? What will it cost? And what other characteristics? How much money is going to be put annually into doing that, and for how long?
So the maintenance of the existing app is costing just under $3 million. That is for cloud hosting and for technical support. The actual advertising is largely being done by third parties. So while I was on the plane coming back, it was Air Canada who was saying, use ArriveCAN, it will speed up your border process. And we're seeing at the airports also extensive advertising of the benefits of ArriveCAN.
Merci.
Thank you. Why isn't applied for the land borders? Why is it only used for airports?
Is to roll out ArriveCAN at the land borders. That's part of our traveller modernisation project, which is ongoing at the moment. Clearly, it was during COVID as part of the public health measures, but the e-declaration will be rolled out at the land borders shortly.
Merci.
Thank you.
Before we go to Mr. Bachrach, would you be able to clarify? You mentioned 3 million. Is that $3 million a year?
It's $3 million a year because we have to
Oh yeah,
cloud
I'm not
hosting,
questioning
all
why.
these
I'm
other
just I
costs.
couldn't understand if it was $3 million a year. Thanks very much, Mr. Bachrach, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, going back to my original questions around invoicing, would it be fraudulent for a contractor to submit an invoice to CBSA indicating that a certain resource had been used to complete the work when that resource wasn't, in fact, used to complete the work? Would that be fraudulent?
It would be if it was a staff augmentation contract. So, for example, if we had asked for a level 3 technical architect and we were delivered a level 2 technical architect, that would be fraudulent. But in this case, in the bottler case, we were asking for an outcome, for an output, and so therefore we were judging the quality of the output on the quality of the work done, not on who did it.
So can I take it from your comments that there was no process to confirm which resources were used in getting to that outcome? What CBSA was concerned with was the quality of the outcome, not the resources that were used to get there?
And especially in this case, because this was a subcontractor to the vendor who we contracted with.
Now, that subcontractor didn't have a contract, just to be clear, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is this idea that different resources in these task authorizations, different resources are valued at different amounts. And we've heard at this committee about the bait and switch approach that some unscrupulous companies use, where they suggest that certain resources are going to be used in order to get the work. And then when the work is actually done, they use different resources that cost them less. Here we have a case where a contractor is indicating that a certain resource was involved in the work when in fact they weren't. And you're saying that that isn't a problem?
The contract, if Bottler's contract would be with Dalian Coradix, it's not with us. We were contracting with Dalian Coradix, and we were asking them to produce 6 documents. And, you know, it was not relevant to us who was producing those documents. What was relevant to us was the quality of the documents in line with the statement of works.
Is it required that the resources used be cited on the invoice? I'm looking at the invoice right here. It includes the task number and the specific resources that were utilized in completing the work. Is that a requirement of the invoicing process?
Not in this case, because we were asking for a task. We weren't asking for individuals. That is a requirement if it's a staff augmentation contract, because then we won't need to check that we have the right skills and experience to do the work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Duncan, welcome to OGGO. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Auditor General said in her report that the documentation provided by the CBSA, the financial records and controls were so poor that they were unable to determine the precise cost, and they pegged it at $60 million. That report's been out now for 50 days. Mr. Moore, can you tell us if you've provided any follow-up documentation since this report to the Auditor's Office to further clarify what exactly the cost of ArriveCAN was?
Work with the Auditor General on identifying the costs which we had assigned to public health.
I'm going to ask you, since the report was tabled, have you provided any further clarification from her report about the exact cost of ArriveCAN after the report was tabled?
No, we have not provided any further information, but the information we've agreed to provide to this committee, we're very happy to share with the Auditor General.
So it's been 50 days, and your work was frankly shredded by the Auditor General and said the number has not been clarified, can't even get an exact number, and you've not provided anything in 50 days to clear up any of the misperception or actually get a firm number.
Well, as I've said before, I don't think it's possible to get a completely firm number because in the first year we did not have a separate accounting code. What we did was we used our experts to make their best estimate of how much it would cost. our best estimate remains $55 million.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're now aware that 76% of contractors who did actually no work on this, that billed the CBSA. We know there's record of shredded documents that is well known and been shared with Canadians. And again, the Auditor General said there were weak financial controls and record keeping when it came to your work. So as a CFO, do you think that a third-party forensic audit of ArriveCAN is necessary based on what you now know and the points I just raised?
So I think you've raised a number of different points in there. So the procurement ombudsman referred to the 76%. That was actually the question which was previously about sort of who does the work. When you're using staff augmentation, we were checking the individuals had the sufficient qualifications.
But I'm going to ask this at a high level. Of all the facts that I raised and the circumstances and what you know now as the CFO, do you believe that an independent third-party forensic audit is necessary with ArriveCAN? We have shredded documents. The Auditor General said there was weak financial records and controls, and the procurement ombudsman report, yes or no, do you believe that a third-party forensic audit is required here in this circumstance?
I don't think it would add any additional, because we've already had a third-party audit in terms of the Auditor General, but also OPPO. What we're acknowledging here is we did not have a cost accounting code in year one. And so it is a judgment how much was being spent on ArriveCAN versus other operational activities.
So I think there's many Canadians would disagree and say a forensic audit in this case by a third party is necessary for each of these, because the more we learn, the more vague and the more evasive, frankly, many of the witnesses will be on this. But Mr. Moore, I want to ask you about performance bonusing. The executives at CBSA that have been responsible for what happened here with ArriveCAN, can you confirm whether they have received bonuses this year or not?
I can't confirm whether they've received bonuses this year, as the year is not actually at an end, but I can confirm that during the period under review, I did receive performance payments, but we've already agreed to come back with information of that to the committee.
Going forward then, in that case, knowing now with the Auditor General's report now tabled, do you believe executives at CBSA responsible for ArriveCAN should get performance bonuses in the future?
Well, I can't comment on that because lots of people are involved in lots of different things.
So you wouldn't rule out, based on what you know and the findings here in the Auditor General's report, the Procurement Ombudsman report, and all the facts that you know, based on how atrocious the financial record keeping was at CBSA, you can't rule out and say now that executives at CBSA that were responsible for this mess should not get a performance bonus going forward, now that you know it's in the Auditor General's report?
So I know what's in the Auditor General, and I'm disappointed. So I come back to my previous comment. When we do our financial assurance, we're on average, it's around about 8 or 9% errors. Most of those are not compliance errors, they're administrative errors. In the Auditor General's case, she identified 18%. That is very disappointing, and I recognize that. However, a lot of that is to do with the fact we did not have a cost accounting code at that time.
Well, there's a $60 million error with ArriveCAN that Canadians are frustrated with. And again, you're disappointed. I'm going to ask you again. So being by disappointed in the contents of the report and how damning it was about the financial practices and record keeping, you're not going to rule out that executives at CBSA this year are going to get performance bonuses based on what we now know with ArriveCAN?
Well, I don't think that's a question I can answer because I do not set performance bonuses. But what I can say is that we are taking action to address all of the recommendations in the Auditor General's report. But I do not agree that it's we don't have the information. There are areas in the information which we are uncertain about, and we had to make estimates.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Atwood, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Moore, and your colleagues for being with us today. And forgive me, I'm kind of joining halfway through here, so I'm going to hopefully not be repeating myself or what my colleagues have already asked. So I see from your submitted, your introductory notes here, you've got that the Public Health Agency of Canada asked the CBSA to assist them by developing a digital form, and the first version of ArriveCAN was then released 6 weeks later. Can you walk us through what those first 6 weeks looked like?
Those first 6 weeks were very, very difficult for the agency. The pandemic had been announced, and we were very much at the front line. We had individuals in the Border Services officers who were dealing with people who could have been infected by COVID-19. There were a number of repatriation flights. And the best we could do at that stage was to have a manual paper-based form. This was an issue for a lot of our officers because at the same time we were being told you could catch COVID from touching paper. So it was an urgent matter to get this form digitized. And, you know, when you look at sort of value for money, the paper-based system was around about $3 per unit, whereas the ArriveCAN system is about $1 per unit, so $1 per traveller. So that was more efficient than the paper-based system. It was actually also much more effective than the paper-based system because the paper-based system had to be sent off. It had to be coded into the records, and it then had to be provided to FAC, who then provided it to municipalities to actually follow up on the quarantine. The Auditor General, in her own report, identifies that it was more effective to use ArriveCAN because they could get that information before the end of a 14-day period, where on the paper-based system, it was taking up to 3 or 4 weeks to get that information. So I think it is worth bearing in mind the sort of the effectiveness and the efficiency, but it was a very difficult time for all of us. Also, very quickly, a large majority of our employees were sent home to work from home, which was a new thing for lots of us. So yes, I would say at the start of the pandemic, it was a crisis situation. We were working incredibly long hours, and during that time, maybe, I'm sure we made mistakes and we should learn from those mistakes, but it was a very stressful and difficult situation.
Thank you very much. I certainly remember that time. You know, we were told to even wash our groceries, for example, or wear gloves to pump gas. So it was certainly a time of uncertainty. So in the next piece here, it mentions, so following the 2.5 years after the fact, CBSA responded to the challenging health requirements as they were coming at you again, kind of drinking from a fire hose. And through over 80 orders in council, there was released 177 different versions of the app. Can you just kind of, I mean, each one I wouldn't ask you to explain, but what predominantly were some of those changes with each one of those iterations of the app?
So when we set up our governance structure in the pandemic, we set up two separate task authorization areas. So I was responsible for the internal task force, and one of my colleagues was responsible for the border task force. All the ArriveCAN was done through the border task force. This is mentioned in the Auditor General's report in 2021. It was then a partnership at that stage between FAC, ourselves, and a number of other government departments. So those decisions were being made at minute by minute. I was not part of those decisions. I was running the internal task force, which was more focused on the activities of the organisation and the health and safety of our officers. But it was a very dynamic environment, and my understanding is things were changing very much at the last minute, and then that had to be coded to allow us to update ArriveCAN at the time. It was very complex, it was very difficult, and hours were being worked, very long hours were being worked.
Thank you. And are you aware of any traveler information and customs applications like ArriveCAN developed or procured by other governments?
So there are a number around the world. All of them were slightly different. Certainly the UK's one, which I was aware of, was different. I know the European one also. But basically they were doing the same function. They were trying to record information on people travelling into the country so that they could trace those contacts. And that was particularly important when you were seeing new variants coming in, and allow the public health agencies around the world to be able to track where those individuals had been and how the spread of the new variants was operating. Also, as the ArriveCAN app progressed, we had the proof of vaccine credential, which was also a very complicated, difficult system for us to be able to identify the vaccines and go right back into the provincial health data and systems to check that they were valid.
And were there any conversations happening? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, if you have a quick question, Miss Atwin, go ahead.
Sure. I'm just wondering were there discussions or dialogue happening as far as shared practices or best practices within those kind of government entities that were facing the same thing, or kind of flying on our own on this one?
And a quick answer, Mr. Moore.
So we did have many conversations with our colleagues around the world, but I think we were slightly flying by the ear because every requirement was different.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brock, please.
As he then was at the CBSA, who did Min Doan directly report to?
He reported to the President, John Osowski, which is the same for me.
Okay. I'm sure you're familiar with the allegations of Mindone's deleted tens of thousands of emails over 4 years.
I'm aware.
You're aware of that? When did you first become aware of that, sir?
When it was raised in committee, I was not aware before then.
I'm sorry?
When it was raised here in committee, or I wasn't aware before.
Okay. Would you agree with me, sir, that potentially deleting, not by corrupted means, but deliberately deleting 4 years' worth of relevant emails during the ArriveCAN development and outlay would constitute not only a highly suspicious action on behalf of Mindone, but also potentially illegal under the criminal code, thinking to mind obstruction of justice? Do you believe that that's worthy of an internal investigation?
So the CBSA does take allegations of wrongdoing very, very seriously, and my understanding that is being looked at.
Is the CBSA investigating that internally, yes or no?
I do not know if they're investigating that specifically, but
will you look into that, and will you provide us with a response?
I would be happy for the agency to provide a response.
Thank you. Are you aware whether or not that allegation of deleting tens of thousands of emails over 4 years has been reported to the RCMP?
I'm not aware whether it's been reported to the RCMP.
Okay. Now, I want to circle back to Government of Canada strategies. There is a couple of issues that raised in the Auditor General's report. Firstly, you, CBSA, I shouldn't say, not you, CBSA informed the Auditor General during the report stage that GC Strategies was awarded their initial contract on the basis of a proposal that is submitted. CBSA indicated that it had discussions at the time with 3 potential contractors about submitting a proposal to develop the ArriveCAN app. Yet, through investigation, the Auditor General found that only 1 proposal was received by the CBSA and not for Government of Canada strategies. Why would the agency deliberately mislead the Auditor General?
So my understanding is at the start of the pandemic, and again, I was not directly involved in these discussions, that they mocked up what the ArriveCAN first version would look like, and they asked 3 organizations, Deloitte, Apple, and GC Strategies.
I'm aware of that. Why would the CBSA deliberately mislead the Auditor General in saying that you received a proposal from Government of Canada strategies when in fact you did not? Why would they deliberately mislead? Yep.
So I'm not aware of that, and I'm sure.
You read the Auditor General report?
Well, I've read the Auditor General's report, but
did you not read that section?
Well, the section there is around GC Strategies was providing people.
No, sir. You, the CBSA, said that GC Strategies provided a proposal. The Auditor General confirmed it did not. So the question is very simple. Why is the CBSA actively misleading the Auditor General in the performance of her role? It really begs to mind the cozy relationship that Government of Canada Strategies has with the CBSA. Second case in point, there was a reference to a $25 million sole source contract going to GC Strategies, and the CBSA invited Government of Canada Strategies to write their own contract. If that's not showing favoritism to GC Strategies, I don't know what is. So what is going on at the CBSA to allow these highly irregular and suspicious contracting practices with Christian Firth and Darren Anthony of Government of Canada Strategies?
So as I've said before, that is not permitted under the rules and regulations. And
but it happened.
It happened, and so...
So who was responsible for that?
That's what the investigation is considering.
Surely, sir, you must have some suspicion. Were you personally involved in allowing GC to do that?
I was not involved in GC Strategies at all.
Are you prepared to name names, sir? Are you preparing to speak truth to power? Are you protecting your president?
I'm not protecting anybody. My understanding is that's all being looked at as part of the investigation.
Who's looking into it?
The investigation and also the RCMP. And
you're talking about Mr. Lafleur? The so-called independent investigator that reports to Ms. O'Gorman?
He is the internal investigator.
Right.
Just like
he's not independent.
And the RCMP are independent, and they are also looking at
the RCMP is independent.
I am not aware of how the status of that. What I am aware of is, it has been longer than our normal standard operating procedures. So Our service standards are 120 working days to complete an investigation. It has been longer than that.
I can tell you, Canadian taxpayers are very disappointed in the operations of the CBSA, sir.
That is our time, gentlemen. Mr. Baines, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question to Mr. Moore is, I was asking you about, I believe we ran out of time. I wanted to ask you about Mr. Doan, about his the decision to pick GC Strategies. His initial response was a team of 1,400 people made this decision, and then when asked, he narrowed it down to 6 director generals. So my question to you is, did this decision come down to these director generals? Were they giving instruction or advice? I'll let you answer that first.
I think Mr. Duan was referring to the fact there are 1,400 people in the Information Science and Technology branch. Those were people who were directly reporting to him as the Vice President. I think it's also clear that the technical authorities for all these contracts was the Board of Technologies and Innovation Directorate. And as I've said before, the Executive Director of that was Mr. Otano, and the DG of that was Mr. MacDonald. I cannot sort of comment on what Mr. Duan actually said back at the evidence. I have looked at the evidence, but I can't comment on the detail.
I'm asking about the 6 director generals. Or Mr. Duan, when asked, was asked to submit those names. I'm not sure if those were ever submitted. So I'm asking the roles of those people and if you could name them.
So I think we can go back and check to see whether the names were, but he was referring to the director generals who report to him. I think in this case it would be unlikely that all of those director generals would be involved in a decision like this. It would have been the responsibility of the DG of the area of his organisation who was doing this contracting.
Would you be able to submit those names of those 6 director generals?
We'd be very happy to submit the names of those if they have not been already submitted.
Okay. When examining options for suppliers, what evidence was CBSA relying on that indicated GC Strategies could provide the federal government value for money?
So again, in the evidence given last week by Public Safety, PSPC, they were on a TBIPS, so they were already a qualified vendor, and that was confirmed by PSPC. In terms of value for money, in terms of contract, that's part of the contract authority's responsibilities. The technical authority is responsible for the statement of work and the technical ability of the contractors to do that work. So I would refer back to PSPC for any questions around the value for money from the contract authority.
On the issues identified by the Auditor General, Procurement Ombudsman, the report's the result of shortcomings in the directive on the management of procurement, or rather the guidance to managers about that directive. What's your view on that?
This is one of the reasons why we have asked all of our delegated managers to do the 4 training courses in order to remind them of what their responsibilities are under the Procurement Directorate. It's also around our other procurement improvement plan activities. For example, the Executive Procurement Review Committee will also be checking that we are complying with all of those rules and regulations. Alex's team has already updated our standard operating procedures with checklists to ensure that we are complying, and we're also putting in place this assurance review process, which will allow us to go into the individual files and ensure they have been complying across all of the files we look at.
Has this been shared with the entire department? Are people being trained upon this? What's the latest?
So everyone has been trained in terms of the first line of defence. We're now training within Alex's directorate the individuals who will be doing the assurance reviews, and also we will be training the Executive Procurement Review Committee in order to ensure that they have all of the knowledge available to them to be able to exercise their judgment correctly.
And how is the new guidance, like what will you be providing a report back on the compliance in some capacity?
Yes, so the reviews will be summarised on a quarterly basis, and they will be reported back to the Executive Committee. The first, we've already piloted the reviews, but our first quarterly report will be in July.
Thank you
Okay, how
very
much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
Time for one very, very brief question.
I'll cede my time. That's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Thank you very much. Earlier, Mr. Moore, you said that you weren't aware that members of your team had received an award for the LCAGM. How can that be? Because it seems to me that as an employee, they'd like to be given a pat on the back by their boss.
I'll ask Alex to give you a detailed answer, but I am disappointed because in my branch we do like to celebrate success, and I would thought it would have been notified to me.
So en contexte, Monsieur le Président.
For context, Chair, I report to the controller, and the controller reports to another level. Oh, yes. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know who would be involved, but Mr. Leahy, earlier we talked about GCRA, that is to say KARM, and there were some elements that were somewhat like ArriveCAN. A lot of goodwill. You wanted to accelerate things. Yeah, it seemed to be like a nerve center for trade. So, how many pages were in the submission from Deloitte? That is to say, what they submitted in terms of specifications. How detailed was it for KARM?
Sur le contrat?
Are you talking about the contract? No, the book of technical specifications. Were there any comments made? And if so, how many? Well, hundreds of pages, and there were a variety of documents, but some 600 plus pages, and there were comments where people from the CBSA had to comment. Were there only comments from the IT people, but from the CBSA as well? From both. It's supposed to start operating May 14? No, it's May 13. May 13. Well, for one, let's not quibble over one day. So are we going to be faced with software that won't be tested enough? KARM has been tested for 2 years. 6 separate activities have been tested. 80 million to date? The budget, the development budget?
Right,
I'll just answer that.
Unless you've got the information there.
It's the development to date is the development budget is 438 and 182 million paid to Deloitte. That's what came up at the last committee. The question was, how much did you pay Deloitte, and how much have you spent on development of this? So 438 on development and 182 to Deloitte for development.
Thanks very much. Mr. Bachrach, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Moore, to a previous question, you indicated that no one raised red flags about GC strategies until this committee's investigation began. Do you stand by that statement?
I do, and I find that disappointing. And I think one of the things we have learnt from here is we do need greater oversight of procurement and task authorizations in the organisation, which is why we have developed up the procurement improvement plan. I think, going back to 2020, the procurement team was relatively small. We have now enhanced the procurement team to act as an assurance provider as well as a contract authority for the contracts we do.
To be clear, though, Mr. Moore, didn't Bottler raise serious concerns and allegations regarding the relationship between GC Strategies and CBSA in 2021?
So my understanding is that Bottler at the time raised concerns with the sorry, I'm losing. So with ISTB around the payments they were making a complaint that they had not been paid by Dalian and Cordix. It wasn't until I think November 2022 that they raised allegations, which went straight to the president, and the president passed those to the Internal Affairs, who then subsequently passed them to the RCMP.
So then, but this committee's investigation didn't start until after that. So CBSA had received the concerns from Bottler prior to this committee beginning its work on ArriveCAN, correct?
I can't precisely remember the dates, but I was made aware of the allegations from the president when she received them in, I think, November 2022, and then they were passed to Internal Affairs.
Yeah, I guess the surprising part of your statement that no one had raised red flags about GC strategies is the fact that if you read the Bottler investigation report that they provided to CBSA, it's alarming. What's the communications and the relationships that are documented in that report point to, and admittedly, not all of these have been proven out, but they point to major misconduct at CBSA. And yet it's taken this committee's work to get to this point where the RCMP is now looking into it, and there are something like 12 different investigations into how CBSA conducts procurement. So I'm just wondering why CBSA didn't take Bottler's red flags more seriously back when they raised them.
So I have not seen...
Sorry, Mr. Moore. I'm sorry, we're quite a bit past our time. Perhaps you can provide that in writing.
Well,
perhaps,
thanks, Mr. Chair.
If I could say, Chair, I've not seen the Bottler report. It's not been provided to me.
Okay, thanks very much. Mr. Berthold?
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Moore, I want to come back to the letter. This, I feel, is an important part of this whole ArriveCAN issue. The letter that you sent to Madame Reza with respect to the exception that should be made for national security. There's no date. When was it written?
It was written, my understanding, on the 1st of June, so I'm sorry that we don't seem to have the date on the letter.
1st June of?
1st of June of 2022. 2020, pardon.
OK, le 1er juin.
June 1, 2020. You seem to... you were ready to answer questions earlier. I have a question. You wanted that the supplier was XR when we were looking for it earlier? Yes, I had a meeting with Mr. Utano's team, and they intended to deal with XR, which was a company that had worked for Transport Canada, who organized together. So you found a supplier for modern tools, XR, but it was XR GC strategy. Can you explain to me exactly what it meant? What exactly? Earlier, you talked to me about GC strategy. Why? When I look at the invitation that I received in April, the two companies were named on the agenda, XR/GC strategies. The two names were together. So it was in this letter then that you signed, Mr. Moore, and it was the first time that you saw GC strategies without naming them. The supplier that you were recommending, that you were quoting in the letter to the minister for PSPC was in actual fact made up of GC strategies and the aforementioned one.
Aware of that. The letter was provided to me by the individuals who were responsible for preparing it, and as you said, it did not refer to the actual name. That's why I asked Mr. Leahy to answer, because he was aware of the names.
Donc, c'est comme ça.
So that's how then the GC strategy got into the file of ArriveCAN.
I would say that for my comment, that reference was not to an individual company which I was aware of, and also it was a reference to a company which was doing commercial goods rather than doing traveller goods, which ArriveCAN.
Mais pour... Là, je sais qu'il y a une question.
Well, I know it's a matter of interpretation, English and French here, but you are hesitating. You avoided citing the names of these two companies earlier, but now we know that it was an actual joint company and not necessarily bound by shareholders or contracts that was making that presentation. So that was the first time in that letter where you speak of an exemption to be made rather than going through the normal process of procurement. That would be the first time that GC strategy got into this file, was part of it.
Je pense, Monsieur le Président, il y a eu...
I think, Chair, there were contracts with GC Strategies that had been let before June the 1st. So I think you have to distinguish between justification for sole source, which is often a case for contracts, and the exception for national security, where a given contract would involve agreements, international agreements. So these contracts that were signed for ArriveCAN were signed after this exception. No, there were contracts that were let before that, but after the letter. I'm talking about after the letter. Yes, there were contracts that were let after the letter. What proportion of contracts, Mr. Martel? Can you answer that? Well, I can commit to giving you the answer.
It's in writing.
Absolutely.
Mr. Baines, I understand you're up, sir.
I believe that's me, actually, Mr. Chair. Is that correct?
I had Mr. Baines, but go ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczuk, if you wish.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Moore, just to comment on the following. Since the information about the ArriveCAN has come to light, we've had the RCMP is looking at ArriveCAN. We have the Ombudsman Procurement Office that has provided a report on the management gaps around ArriveCAN. We've had the Auditor General provide a report around the management gaps, financial gaps, documentation gaps around the ArriveCAN. We will be hearing from the Competition Bureau of Canada, as I understand, will be coming here as a witness. We've also asked the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, as I understand it as well too, to possibly appear and provide testimony or look into this issue. At the same time, there is a CBSA investigation that is ongoing, as we have heard, an internal investigation. At the same time, PSPC already has suspended GC strategies back in November of 2023. I believe CBSA has followed suit as well, suspending, contracts with GC strategies. In March 6th of this year, we understand that PSPC has suspended security status for GC strategies as well too. Can you comment on sort of the what's taking place right now in terms of the investigations and studies that are taking place into ArriveCAN? Can you just comment on it? And are we missing something? Is there anything else that we need to be other agencies or bodies that we could bring to bear on this issue?
So I don't feel that we're missing anything. There have been an awful lot of studies. I would put them into two categories. I think, we know that issues arose during the pandemic, and we are grateful for the lessons learned. I think the lessons learned are fairly similar across most of the studies. And as I've said before, we're putting in place a very detailed procurement improvement plan, but also a wider management improvement plan, which includes financial management. I think the second category is wrongdoing. And we are committed. We take allegations of wrongdoing very seriously. We are committed to acting on any founded wrongdoing. It's probably worth just sort of thinking about sort of our wider investigations. So in 2022, we had 212 founded allegations, and we took disciplinary action on 144 of those founded allegations. So we do see, sadly, investigations and allegations which are being made, and we have a very professional team who complete that work. Clearly, there's also an investigation going on for the RCMP. So I can't talk about the wrongdoing, and I would leave that up to the experts. But what I can say is we've already put in place very clear improvement plans around the lessons to be learned. I don't think necessarily there's anything being missed in the lessons learnt. And as the Controller General said a few meetings ago, perhaps this is now the time to allow CBSA to get on and deliver those improvements, because really we have a lot to do. And I think we recognise the problems. We are disappointed in a lot of those problems, and now we are working to address them.
It's been asserted that the $50+ million of the ArriveCAN, that the costs have ballooned out of control. But we heard today from your testimony that, in fact, in the first year, $5 million was approved for the ArriveCAN system, not just the app, but the system. And then in year 2, additional funding allocations were made of about $25 million. And then in year 3, an additional $25 million were provided to run the ArriveCAN system. Can you speak to that and speak to the assertion that CBSA was not aware of the costs?
So thank you very much for that. So, lots of talked about value for money, and actually I spent the first 10 years of my career being an external auditor, and I'm very aware of the value for money studies. Value for money is made up of 3 core functions: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And I do believe ArriveCAN provided value for money. I don't believe it provided best value for the taxpayer. And the examples I'll use on that one, it was very clear to us that in terms of effectiveness, it was providing information to the Public Health Agency so they could enforce quarantine on a timely basis. That was not being provided by the paper-based system, and the Auditor General recognises that in her report. In terms of efficiency, it's also clear that the ArriveCAN app was costing around about $1 per person. We had 60 million travellers processed, and it was around about $60 million in terms of the cost. That compares to the $3 per person, which is a paper-based system. Economy is a much more difficult thing to prove, and it also requires judgment and hindsight to look at economy. So I do not believe that we necessarily had best value for the taxpayer, and we learnt a lot of lessons there, but we were in an emergency crisis situation. We overused contractors, which I think elsewhere we would take more time, we would do less of that. If it wasn't in a crisis, we would have had a project plan. We would have actually treated this as a project, and we would have had a plan, and we would have implemented it. So yes, I think it has provided value for money, not necessarily best value for the taxpayer.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzmirchuk.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Colleagues, before we adjourn, I need to approve a couple quick budgets, please. One is on the sub-Cs, and the others are for the main estimates. Each one is, one's 500, one is, I think, 1,000. It's just for headsets and meals. We probably won't use the headset money, and we won't use all the meals, but they're both 1,000, so. And as usual, it's for contingency in case we need to send out headsets, which I don't think we will. So I see thumbs up and general agreement for the sub-Cs for 1,000, and then the same for the mains for 1,000 as well. I see thumbs ups all around. Thank you very much. Mr. Brock, sir?
Yes.
Before we adjourn?
Before we adjourn, colleagues, as a committee, we've been dancing around several issues of disclosure with various witnesses in terms of bottler communications with CBSA, the misconduct report that started the internal investigation, and the referral to the RCMP, and lastly, the whole issue regarding the deleted emails in the report generated by CBSA. So, Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to move a motion at this time in both official languages. The clerk has this motion in both languages. If you could distribute it to the committee. The motion reads, and I'm very flexible in terms of the timing here as well, colleagues, that the committee direct the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, to present no later than April the 2nd, 2024, A, all bottler AI communication with Aaron O'Gorman and other employees of the CBSA, B, the misconduct report received from bottler AI in the fall of 2022, and C, any and all evidence pertaining to the deleted and or missing CBSA emails attributed to Min Doan. Hoping I can get unanimous consent, Chair.
Starting the speaking list, I saw Mr. Kuzmierczak, then Mr. Souza, and then Mr. Casey. Go ahead, Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Mr. Chair, I just ask for a little bit of time to suspend here, that we suspend so that my colleagues and I have a chance to review this motion and to discuss it, please.
Sure. 5 minutes, Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. With everyone's permission, we will excuse our witnesses then, if that's okay with everyone. I take that as yes. We'll suspend for 5 minutes, and in the meantime, Mr. Moore, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Martel, and Mr. Alexander, even though you didn't get to join in today, thanks for joining us today, and we are suspended.
Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Please like and subscribe and share it on social media. I hope you're enjoying the video. I think it is going to be over here soon. They're just going to debate a motion. Anyone who would like to support the channel can do so by becoming a member or purchasing a super chat or sticker.
I had the speaking list of Mr. Kusmirchuk, Mr. Sousa, and Mr. Casey, but I just see Mr. Sousa's hands up. Are we fine starting with him, Mr. Kusmirchuk, or did you wish? Perfect. Mr. Sousa? You need to turn your camera on, please.
That is true.
There we go. Thank you, sir.
My camera is off when it should be on. My mic is on when it should be off. What can I tell you? Listen, we'd like to propose an amendment to this, and I'm just waiting for it to come on. In regards to the timing, only because some of these things are ongoing, we would like to extend some of that, and we also want to deal specifically with A, B, and C accordingly. Right now, you have April 2nd as a possibility. We're suggesting that the timing may have to go further in order to allow for some of the work that's being done, particularly around item C.
Yeah. Do you have a recommended date?
I do. I believe we were suggesting the 19th, but Mr. Chair, I'm just awaiting the final amendment as in accordance with regards to this. And I think B is already established. So A and B is something that we should be able to obtain more effectively within this timeline, but the C is not I don't believe it'll be because it's being reviewed now, I believe, as by other committees as well. So just a moment, I'm trying to talk to allow myself the opportunity to see the final amendment, Mr.
Yeah, if
Chair.
I can interrupt you, Mr. Sousa, I'm getting some indication, and I apologize because it's difficult because you're not in the room. I'm getting some indication that I think the parties are fine eliminating C, just because the OIC is looking at that, and I think we all get your point on the timeline on that as well.
Yeah.
So.
Unless somebody has some more clarity, I mean, I think you just need a little extra time. Just finalize the amendment, Mr. Chair.
So April 19th and eliminate C. Is that
okay?
Is that correct, Mr. Sousa?
Well, I'll read it to you as I've just
perfect.
obtained. So it reads as follows: that the committee direct the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, to present no later than April 19th, 2024, A, all Butler AI communications with Aaron O'Gorman and other employees at the CBSA, B, the misconduct report received by Butler AI in the fall of 2022. And it continues on to say, any and all evidence pertaining to the deleted and or missing CBSA emails referred to Mindone. So if C is being suggested to delete from the amendment, I'm okay with that as well.
Well, why don't we make that part of your amendment then? So we change the date to April 19th and just eliminate C. Is that fair, Mr. Sousa?
That's fair.
Great. So on Mr. Sousa's amendment, I see Mr. Kusmirchuk on the amendment.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it's present to committee.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Are we okay to, can we get UC on Mr. Sousa's amendment, which is changing April 2nd, April 19th? We'll say at noon because we need a time, so we'll say at noon if that's okay. And then eliminating C.
And adding committee after present.
I'm sorry, adding committee after.
To present to committee.
Yeah, and my computer just crashed, sure. Sure, so I'm sensing thumbs up all around for Mr. Sousa's amendment. So we're back to the amended motion. And anyone wish to speak, or can I assume safely we're all in agreement with that? Do we need to have it just read back, just to be on the safe side, or are we fine? Wonderful. Thanks very much. If there's nothing else, colleagues, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, guys, that's it. Have a wonderful day. We will see you again tomorrow. There is another meeting. I'm not sure. I gotta look at to see what it is, and I'll let everybody know. But don't forget to like and subscribe, share the content, and if you really feel generous, you can help the channel out by becoming a member or by purchasing a super chat or a sticker, which really does help out the channel. Other than that, have a good day.